It's finally that time of year again. The clocks have gone back, the summer feels long gone, a chill is setting in, and it is finally time for the Gothic. In today's episode, I've curated for you a list, an ultimate, in my opinion, list of Gothic literature and Gothic-esque literature. But before we get into things, what exactly is the Gothic?
So today we're talking about Gothic literature, also known as Gothic horror. The word Gothic actually comes from the Goths, so the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths. These are Germanic tribes that, only sacked Rome once or maybe twice, may have contributed to the decline of the Western Roman Empire, which then followed by the medieval period. So then it's in the Renaissance that they start using the word Gothic to mean medieval, but also barbaric. So as a literary aesthetic, it is one of more base human emotions, of lust, of fear, of madness, and of desire. The Gothic emerges in the mid-18th century, holding both power and steam all through the 19th century too. The Gothic has left behind this ordered and rational world of the Enlightenment, and in a world of rapid industrialization, urbanization, and after decades of political instability, it is no wonder that the stories of the uncertain, of the supernatural, of the unexplained, in the shape of ghosts, ghouls, monsters, and the absence of God have taken centre stage in this 19th century consciousness. I shit you not, it is storming outside and I can hear thunder. Anyway, the Gothic is characterised by old decrepit buildings, mainly churches and abbeys, powerful symbols of crumbling influence and the awesome power of nature and of the beyond. But it doesn't just influence the landscape but also the mind. Many of the characters of the Gothic are driven mad or morally corrupt or driven mad by fear. It is a very human reminder of the fragility of not just the mind but also of the soul. So anyway, my Substack is linked and here's the Gothic reading list.
So on the menu today I've got some short Gothic things that are like 100-ish pages. I've got some longer things that, even Gothic aside, are absolute classic staples of literature and of the 19th century. And I've also picked out one particular author for you who does not get enough credit for all that she's done for defining the Gothic and the proto-Gothic as a genre. And then just a quick fire round at the end of some more spooky, scary contemporary suggestions for you. So this is my ultimate Gothic reading list. Now, disclaimer, I'd like to remind you that in the same way that a puppy is not just for Christmas, the Gothic is not just for Halloween. This is something that you really can read half the year. I would say that October, excellent. November, still excellent until the Christmas people defrost, and then indulge in this all January, February, March long. This is really good stuff for the slightly more miserable months where you want to be inside reading a book and it's dark and it's late and you need a cup of something warm to keep you from the bone-chilling fear of what you're going to read. So let's kick off with the short things. I'm not going to say this is an easy pile by any means, but let's just say this is for those who are a little bit more with commitment issues, shall we say. And I think it makes the most sense actually to start with Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto. I picked this copy up when a friend of mine and I went to Strawberry Hill House. If you're unfamiliar, this is Horace Walpole's home. It's a big house in Richmond. It used to be outside of London. Very interesting historic house to go have a look at if you're ever in the area. And this is written in the 18th century. This is from 1764 and really widely regarded as the first or earliest sort of Gothic novel. What's important to know about this is with the Gothic, you come off the back of the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment was all about science and being rational and reason. So then to take this pivot to then go more towards the supernatural and the fantasy and horror and the suspenseful is a really big sort of cultural shift. And this is one of the first ones to do that. It's set in medieval Italy in, as you can guess, the Castle of Otranto. It is about Manfred, the Prince of Otranto, and a curse that haunts his house and his obsession with preserving his line after the death of his son. It is a novel of tragedy, of guilt, and of divine retribution. It is ghostly and it is violent. It is something that really shocked the original readership. As a modern reader reading this, I think a lot of it, because it's, the Gothic has become very tropified. It's something that we're very familiar with, so it's something that doesn't really surprise us or shock us. We kind of often know where it's going, but for a contemporary audience, they would never have read anything like this. So in that sense, it was incredibly, incredibly revolutionary. And remember, this is still a period of time where when you start talking about, supernatural and folklore and stuff, which, a lot of folklore is deeply tied to paganism, and the church still has a very thorough rule in the 18th century, and just a lot of the Gothic can happen, supernatural discussions can happen because of this waning religious influence. This is one that if I finish Dracula, I'm currently reading Dracula, this is the next one that I wanted to read. And I'm telling myself I can't read it now because it's not going to be seasonal anymore, but Emma, it's not a Christmas novel. You can read the Gothic for all long dark months of the year. So that's something that I will probably do in February when I get completely miserable. I want someone else to feel miserable with me, and I think these kind of novels are perfect for that. So this one you need to know is part of your education, because this is one that gets credit for doing it first. Does it do it right? Some people say it's boring. I at least think it's an interesting one to have a look at. Next up is one that I read quite recently. This was Charlotte Perkins Gilman, The Yellow Wallpaper. This one is super interesting because of how, it's a short story, there's a couple others in here, but you can definitely knock this off in a night. You should have no issue with that. It's about a woman who goes to the countryside, to a house, to a spooky house, because she's taking the rest cure. And this is a lot later than a lot of the rest of his novel, mind you. And it's about this woman's sort of descent into madness as she's trapped in this room, and her relationship to the wallpaper, the yellow wallpaper, and what she sees or what she doesn't see, and what she hears or what she doesn't hear. So there's a lot about this like psychological element to it, and about how, you know, this like thing of an unreliable narrator. The Gothic is full of that, mind you, of unreliable narrators, found manuscripts, different sorts of narration as well, diary entries, you know, news articles, epistolary elements to it. So I think that's really interesting, because it's about how you as a reader are able to trust or not trust what is being written, and this is an excellent one for that because it's somebody's like psychological descent into madness. And I find it more interesting because it's written from a woman's point of view, that kind of like a domestic madness that you get going. So this is really short and sweet and really quite spooky and unsettling, and it's also just a great one to read if you haven't read any classics whatsoever. Not intimidating, a lot more modern than the others, very, very fun. So another really classic one is Robert Louis Stevenson. He's the guy who wrote Treasure Island, right? I think he wrote Treasure Island. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This is one of those things of alter ego, this other, this monstrous other self that is really interesting to explore, especially in relation with this like scientific element, because again, with the Enlightenment you have science and reason, but then when it comes to the Gothic and the Romantic, you start to get science with more that moral, lack of moral purity. You know, you see this in Frankenstein. It's this idea that you're creating, have this mastery of, this godlike mastery, that you're creating these horrendous things, but you as a person, as a human, are capable of creating these demonic, you know, parts of you, or senses of self, like weird demonic senses of self, or the fact that you suddenly have this godlike power to create life, but it's not got, you know, it's not pure good moral life, it's this grotesque kind of stuff. And that's obviously an interesting part of this. This is something story-wise, Jekyll and Hyde, that I think we all know maybe through, especially I know it through cartoons, interestingly enough. Just most about the cartoons I used to watch as a child, but this kind of like switching of self is a really, really interesting one, and also like the moral elements that go with it. I read this as a teenager. I thought it was a bit boring, but I wonder if now reading as an adult that perspective would change. It's set in Victorian London, and again this kind of mystery and psychological horror. And as Dr. Jekyll creates this sort of potion to sort of separate the two sides of him, the good and the bad, the good and the evil. It's an interesting story because of how it explores this like duality and this moral deprivation and this idea that, you know, this seedy underbelly and this like other kind of thing. And I think it's important to note that obviously at this time, yes, is this too early for Jack the Ripper? But it's this idea that, you know, you're starting to get serial killers, and you're starting to get, you know, in this like urbanized places, these sort of cesspools and cesspits of immoral behaviour that no amount of God or church seems to be able to regulate, which I do think is obviously very super interesting. Speaking again though of like more seminal texts, kind of like Castle of Otranto is, this is Carmilla. This is a much earlier vampire novel than Dracula is, and it's also still, I keep getting this wrong. I keep thinking first it's Dracula, and then I found this and I was like, oh, but then, you know, Sheridan Le Fanu, of course, he has a more earlier one. No, there are much more earlier vampire novels than even these two. And it's honestly, by the time you get to Dracula, the readers would have been very, very familiar with what a vampire is and almost bored of the genre or the trope because they've seen this story before. They've heard this story before. But this is particularly interesting because it's a lot about like sapphic vampirism, and vampirism is always really interesting as how you look at it as like a metaphor for like sexuality and for like sexual depravity, and again this move from very moral structured societies, especially as you urbanize more. And this is set in Austria. It's about somebody who visits a house and then suddenly someone just keeps getting ill and they just don't get any better. Yes, a young woman, Laura, becomes close to the enigmatic Carmilla. And it's very interesting if you look at it through that sexuality lens, and then especially how it's about women. So I found it very funny when I was like, oh, so sapphic vampires, like lesbian vampires, is not like a new annoying thing that men have come up with. They've always been annoying, and they came up with this stuff ages ago. Because obviously we always portray vampires as very attractive, and there is very much something about the fact that vampires need to they need to penetrate you in order to suck your lifeblood out, and that they take from you even the very sexual sort of nature about the fact that when they bite you they have to go to your neck. Like, there's something very both alluring and it's about like predatory humanoid kind of people, isn't it? And that kind of gets manifested then in the vampire. Speaking then of course of vampires, I am currently reading Dracula, that is on this list, but I picked this up recently. This is one of those new penguin editions, the really pretty ones, the red ones. This one is Bram Stoker, The Burial of the Rats. This is a spine-chilling collection from Dracula creator Bram Stoker, showcases 5 haunting tales, including the newly discovered Gibbet Hill. Fun. From Dracula's guest to the judge's house, each gripping story leaves you breathless and perhaps afraid to turn up the lights. Dare you explore the darkness? If you're less interested in reading Dracula, because Dracula is 400 pages, and the first, I'll be honest with you, the first third I really have enjoyed so far. The second 2 thirds are a little bit more questionable. So if you're a bit cautious about wanting to commit to something like that is known for being a good third and then 2 thirds, maybe you can wet your whistle with this. Some short stories for the gothically inclined. Let's do the longer boys. Oh Christ. I promise you that I don't like drop books on person. On person? I do drop them. On person. On me. This is my stack for those who do not have commitment issues, shall we say. Or just are speedy readers. I call it commitment issues because I'm not a speedy reader. But never mind, my camera died, so my battery died, so I had to charge it, and anyway, so let's continue then, before I was so really interrupted by my own technology. These are just the books that will require a little bit more time and a little more brain power. But like I said, the Gothic is not just for Halloween, not for Christmas, for Halloween. It is honestly, I think, best to read in those like miserable months of like January, February, March, where you are at your most just and pale, and you feel very much like the monsters that many of these novels describe, which means we should obviously get started straight in with the mother of science fiction herself, Mary Shelley. This is Frankenstein. Where, you know, characters that get used and used and over and over and over again. So what's really fun about this is that it was very famously written as part of a writing competition between Mary Shelley, Percy Shelley, Byron, and then also a man called John Polidori, who is credited with writing sort of the first like proper vampire novel called The Vampire, which is very Byron inspired as far as I understand.
And this vampire obviously is absolutely not based on Lord Byron whatsoever. Not at all. No resemblance. Also, Lord Byron, that is such a historical I now fear I've said this in more than one video, but I need to make my feelings known. I just think the fact that everyone, including this guy, basically writing him into this book, like the fact that like everyone trying to fuck Lord Byron is just like the funniest thing. Okay, that man must have had such. Can you imagine how much charisma this fucker must have had? Like,
this is a group of people who are writing these novels, and I don't know about you, but I would very thoroughly say that I think Mary Shelley won that one. She's a mother of science fiction. Frankenstein is the novel of a young man, Victor Frankenstein, who is a scientist, and he creates this terrible monster made of different bits of, well, reconstituted bits of human. And so it's set predominantly in Switzerland, in Geneva, which web story was conceived. So it's a lot about this relationship to like man and God and creation and nature and harsh environments, because they spend a lot of time as well, you know, in the Arctic. This novel starts through a series of letters written by a captain to his sister, I believe, in London, that they've dragged this person out in the Arctic freezing waters and they cannot believe that he's alive. Regardless, my point is that it's so fun in terms of how it, you know, discusses creation and morality, and again, this kind of godlike thing in the way that Jekyll and Hyde do, of what moral right do you have to create. And also what I find interesting is a lot of it's like creating myth stuff. You create something, it's a man doing it. I think there are less conversations in a lot of his novels or themes and ideas about like women creating, because women already create. It's like God has said that women may create life, and life that is good and is virtuous. So then what does man create? Monsters. Which I thought was very entertaining if you maybe take that point of view. But it is obviously an absolute classic of the genre. She gives us sci-fi, she helps redefine the Gothic, and it is very supernatural and spooky. And what is also very fun is the relationship in this household and between all these characters. Really recommend. I think there are definitely bits where you're like, yes, I'm not reading a modern novel, that's for sure. You're still reading something older, it still demands more of you. And the thing with these novels is a lot of them, there's a lot of scope for like this heavy philosophical discussion. I don't think it's too heavy in any of them really. Like it kind of goes on and on sometimes in 18th century novels. They do some philosophical monologuing. Less in this, but it's still there. Just obviously keep that in mind when you read it. That's kind of how I'm feeling a bit about reading Dracula. You know, I really enjoyed it. And what were my notes? What were my notes? Point of creation is this is called Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus. So I think that also like adds this angle of like, you know, creation and stealing secrets from the gods. You know, if like to give life is a god-given right, then, you know, is man, who are we to create something? There's a lot of like fun discussions about that in there. I wrote notes because if you're new to me, hi, I annotate. I'm going to do an annotating, like an updated annotating video because I can. She wrote themes. So yes, it's a book about death, about loss, about love, and about grief. Moral failings of the legal system and then judgment. It's about justice and brackets, and more importantly, injustice. It's about guilt, it's about depression and madness, obsession, science and morals, creation and destruction. Oh, bit of a travel novel, those romantics and their voyages, which it really is, because again, with this novel, they really go all over the place, and there's something very fun about that. And I think also, again, you know, the romantics speak a lot about the sublime, and often the sublime in terms of nature. So, you know, this awe-inspiring power of nature. So yes, like the mountains and lakes and storms and harsh climates. And then, you know, questions of humanity, like what is it that makes you human? Like what is it that makes us human, and what makes them ghosts and ghouls and monsters and vampires, even if they look human, human-ish and humanoid. It is a very interesting book, and I'm really happy that I read it. This is part of this enjoyable thing about reading classics, is I'm just so pleased I read it. I think it just gives a lot of context to a character that we see over and over and over again in modern settings and tellings. For example, just now is being released Guillermo del Toro. He's doing Frankenstein adaptation with Jacob Elordi in it and Mia Goth. Good casting, good casting. Jacob Elordi's everywhere. Like, why are we dragging Jacob Elordi all over the Gothic? But like, I kind of see it though. I'm not a hater. I want to be a snob, but I'm actually just like, put that man in more movies. I don't care.
I have to just interrupt myself. Victor Frankenstein is being played by Oscar Isaac. Jacob Elordi is playing the fucking creature.
And I'm looking forward to that movie. If it gets the Nosferatu treatment, I'm gonna lose my fucking mind, okay? So excited. If I've talked about Nosferatu, I must talk obviously then about Dracula. I have read just over a third, halfway. I have thoroughly enjoyed what I've read so far, but I know that apparently now it's all downhill. So I'm just like bracing myself for that, and I've kind of stopped picking it up because of that. I really want to finish reading it. This is a lot of fun. The story itself I really didn't know properly until I watched Nosferatu, this adaptation. It's absolutely banging. It is a horror film, by the way, which I like chose to ignore because of how badly I wanted to see it. Excellent adaptation. And it's really fun now, obviously I'm reading this and I'm using this as visual sort of reference points for this. I think he fucking nailed it. The cinematography in this, all the set dressing, all the production design, absolutely fucking phenomenal. I hate to say it, but like, I kind of see Lily Rose Depp as good casting. And I am constantly reading Jonathan Harker as Nicholas Hoult because that is also perfect casting. But my point is that it's very fun reading of this poor little lawyer who's ended up in this scary Transylvanian castle. It's very amusing and it's very enjoyable, and it actually is spookier than I thought it was going to be. I always find that we rag on my mum constantly because to my brother she once said that turning of the screws like the scariest thing she'd ever read. We joke about that constantly because I feel like that standard of like spook and horror, historically speaking, it's a lot lower than like we expect. We want like more horror and more violence to actually shock us socially, which, you know, take from that what you will. I've actually found bits in this really quite scary, so I've been enjoying that, and I think there's a lot to be said about how enjoyable sometimes it is to read things that are supposed to provoke very like deep primal responses of emotion, of fear in you. I think it's very interesting. Like, obviously horror movies I think are quite interesting and easy, not easy, but like, because I'm a filmmaker, like I know the rules of how horror movies like make you feel sick and scared, but to do that with writing I think is crazy. Like, you're using words to make me really scared. Unbelievable. I'm really enjoying it, but I've also kind of come to this conclusion that I think part of the reason of Dracula's consistent use in popular culture comes from like a copyright thing, where after Bram Stoker's death they made that original Nosferatu without any permission from Bram Stoker's widow, and that's one of the reasons that it becomes much more popular and also sets a copyright precedent, which I think is really interesting. I think it's just another like funny reason as to how this like then sticks in cultural consciousness, because by the time Bram Stoker writes Dracula, like, vampires have been done. The audience knows what vampires are. In other words, he's almost 100 years too late to the game for being original, but he's very much fun. And it's also about the fact that like a lot of it's like reported in different ways. It's journal entries, it's letters, it's newspaper entries, very typical of the genre. But I can also see why filmmakers have come to this time and time again. Yes, the Gothic is full of really strong visual aesthetics, so no wonder Wuthering Heights getting remade, no wonder there are so many adaptations of Dracula, of Frankenstein. Like, there is a reason, because the Gothic is so visually strong. But also with Dracula, I feel like that section where he's in Transylvania, it's really short. It's a lot shorter than you think. He spends a lot of time in Whitby. I can understand that filmmakers have been drawn to it because you're like, there's so much potential here to expand this character. From at least the point I've read, you see Dracula in the beginning, but then he sort of goes away, and then you swap narratives and you don't really see him as much anymore. I will say that I think there's a lot there for filmmakers to play with, because there's so much backstory you can add in, which then makes me sad that Bram Stoker didn't do that or see that. I can see why it's got that grip in our cultural consciousness and why it's a source text people go to again and again, because there's just a lot. There's so much to build on. All right, let's do another. This is obviously, this is a picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Again, a more later one. This does count as the Gothic, but I'm slightly less inclined to call it as such, mainly because it's more of a philosophical novel, and also like decadent. Like, that's kind of like very Oscar Wilde, right? It's a story of a man who has made a deal where his portrait will age while he stays eternally youthful. And it is this painting that accumulates all of this aging and this moral decay of this character. It's about this man's vanity, about his pursuit of beauty and of pleasure, and how this continued just like lust sort of takes him down this ever more decadent and morally corrupt route, leading ultimately to ruin and murder. That is the story of The Picture of Dorian Gray. It's something that I studied when I was maybe 17, 16, and I thoroughly enjoyed constantly underlining and making a note of homoerotic subtext. 10 out of 10 entertainment if you need to teach that to like a bunch of 17-year-olds. Ugh, I can't believe that I owned this copy. 2014. Nice, Emma. It's barely annotated, you bitch. You did not fucking read this, Emma. I did read it. I definitely did. I can't believe it's barely annotated. And only in pencil. Pathetic. It's an absolute 19th century classic. First came across this concept in the movie League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. This idea of his portrait ages where he doesn't. That really hooks into your imagination, especially if you see that as a child. Like, that hooked in there and that never let go. Reading that, in the same way that reading Frankenstein, Dracula, reading all of these, because we've already seen these movies, so then to go into the text itself and like explore and see what's in there is also just so incredibly fun and entertaining, and I cannot recommend enough. Okie dokie, next recommendation is The Woman in White by Vicky Collins. This is Gothic, but it's also a bit more towards the like detective, mystery, crime sort of elements. It's set in London, but also in the English countryside, in, again, an isolated house in Cumbria. It's considered more one of the first like mystery novels. A teacher in the middle of the night meets this woman mysteriously dressed in white on a moonlit road. So it is a novel about lies, about deception, about family secrets, and about ruin. And it's taking a lot of these like Gothic things of like madness and confinement and isolation, but then also like mixing it in, which I find a lot of women who write Gothic things do. They mix it in with this like social realism about family and about particularly how women end up being vulnerable to control and easily manipulated, pointing out that this is how women are being, you know, whether physically abused or emotionally abused. So one thing that is really important and interesting about the Gothic with women is these all like sort of tragic female characters and how they are being you know, abused by people in positions of power around them. I think that's very, very interesting, especially because that is going to pop up in the next 3 we're talking about. Of course, we're doing it. Well, we have a Bronte set here. This is a Bronte, a novel about a woman set in a massive house with a crazy man. Which one could I possibly be talking about? The answer is all of them. But let's obviously start with Wuthering Heights. Emerald Fennell is currently doing the adaptation of this. I am gassed to see it. I am. I won't lie. I'm excited to see it. I thought Saltburn was an incredibly beautiful aesthetic film, but the plot made absolutely no fucking sense, by the way. Absolutely not a little bit of sense in that plot. Let's see how she does with adapting material. Wuthering Heights is the ill-fated, somewhat romance. People think this is a romantic book, and I'm like, who's in love with who in this novel? Of a toxic relationship, toxic family, isolated houses on the Yorkshire moors. It's a bit spooky, it is a little bit unhinged, and it is a lot about, yeah, ability to manipulate, women being vulnerable, isolation, all of those good things. As is Jane Eyre, which I haven't read yet, because I thought it was more like a summery novel. I kind of felt like reading this in the spring, maybe not now, but then I googled it and I was like, should I be including this? Apparently yes. Again, it's about a woman in a large house and isolated and, you know, unnatural, slightly crazy things happening. I find it very interesting and honestly unsurprising that all of the Bronte sisters have written things along similar themes. If you ever get the chance to visit the Bronte parsonage in Haworth, do. It's a really, really lovely, it's a lovely day out for the whole family. But again, it's about, you know, Mr. Rochester's secret, and about family, and about lies and ruin and deception. And I think it's interesting how, like, these are obviously all the things that women are most spooked by. For men, it's they are scared of monsters, and women are just scared of men. I think that kind of tells you all you really need to know. Again, about morals, lies, deception, and set in spooky, isolating settings. The whole point is always about this isolation, and as well about like, oh, but you're in a beautiful house, and it's a big house, and you've got lots of money, so it's fine. Like, you know, what, like, abuse can't happen in big homes. There's spookier things can happen. There's more places to hide and hide other people. Yes, carrying on. We have Anne Bronte's The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, which is again set in a big spooky house, which is again isolated. But it's the story of a woman who is, I think she's divorced, a beautiful secretive woman with her young son. So this one falls a bit more into sort of Gothic realism, and definitely like feminist fiction, and definitely sort of more like social realism. And the story really centres on like this man's interest in this mysterious woman who's become a tenant at this hall. She becomes a big object of speculation and mystery, and then it sort of slowly unravels for you to understand that she's a woman who has a fled alcoholic abusive husband. And then it also has, like, you know, I think at least aesthetically elements for Gothic and stuff. So yeah. Oh, look, we've made our way through the Bronte sisters. Amazing.
This also feels like the right place to point out, like, if any of you are in my comments being like, Emma, why didn't you add Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen? It's a satire of the Gothic. That's why. Satire.
Lovely. So yes, I've got 2 quick fire rounds for you now. I would like to just, if you haven't heard of her, I need to introduce. These are novels by Anne Radcliff. Anne Radcliff is a late 18th century writer, and she's actually considered a lot like proto-Gothic and Gothic. She really doesn't get very much credit for the influence she has had on the Gothic as a genre, you know, with its themes, its aesthetics, and its tropes. The books I have in front of me are The Italian, The Mysteries of Udolpho, and The Romance of the Forest. Romance of the Forest is set in France in a ruined abbey where a persecuted woman has come to take refuge with this mysterious family who have a lot of secrets and apparently a lot of hidden skeletons. And it's a lot about the rational and the supernatural, and this whole feeling of like, am I going insane? And again, of isolation. They take refuge in a ruined abbey in southeastern France where sinister relics of the past, a skeleton, a manuscript, and a rusty dagger are discovered in concealed rooms. My mum has read a different one of her, I think it's A Sicilian Romance, and she said that it's very funny because you feel like you're reading, and I quote, a Scooby-Doo novel, because it has lots of these things of secret staircases and noises in scary parts of the castle, and oh my gosh, hidden doors and passageways, and in the library. And she says this because, well, Anne Radcliffe is doing it, she's doing it for the first time. But for us, already tropes at this point. But she's coming up with this stuff. This is The Mysteries of Udolpho is set in the 16th century, and it's set in southern France and also in Italy. It's about a woman's imprisonment in the castle of Udolpho by her guardian. So yes, there's again a lot about this like psychological sort of novel that starts happening at this point as well. It's like isolation and, you know, when one has time alone with one's thoughts. And then yes, the last one I wanted to mention about her is The Italian. Unsurprisingly set in Italy. This one is more, it's a romance, but then sort of set within the fact that it's threatened by this sinister monk, there's dark convents, and then there's secret plots and different moral conflicts, and it's a lot about how this tension between like reason and then also like the hypocrisy of the church and like of religion. This kind of thing you can see happen with the end of the Enlightenment and then having this clash then now against supernatural and all these kinds of things. This starts happening at this point, like it's the end of the Enlightenment. Like I said earlier, it's interesting that she's setting this in Italy because Catholics are known for being more superstitious, at least in the eyes of Protestants. There's a lot more conflict here that you can have a ride through that. I'm assuming Anne Radcliffe was Protestant. I think we can probably safely assume that Anne Radcliffe was Protestant, and I mean, I'm going to go with that because that makes what I've just said make sense, so that suits me. Oh, perfect. Have I actually got through my suggestion? No, there's a whole part. There's a whole other pile. If you're interested in Shelley, if you're interested in Wollstonecraft, because mother and daughter, there is a book my mum bought me a while ago called Romantic Outlaws, which was about them. Disclaimer, I've not read it, but maybe this is up one of your boats. If you're this far into a video about Gothic literature, come on. Okay, and finally, let's do a quick fire round. I want to say that I have not read any of these. Some of these are recommendations from my brother. Some of these I just know might fit in, so I would just love to know, you know, from you guys, if you guys have read them, are they good? Are they worth it? I obviously own these books, but you know, should I prioritize reading them? So of my brother's recommendations, his are The Fisherman, a novel by John Langham, which is set in like upstate New York. This is Dracul by Das Stoker, which I think is a descendant of Bram Stoker, and it's like a fictionalized sort of imagination of him writing Dracula. 21-year-old Bram Stoker has barricaded himself inside the tower of the long-abandoned abbey. And then we also have A Lush and Seething Hell by John Hornor Jacobs. This is actually 2 stories in one. My brother says this is really good. I also figured I would throw in Parfum. I think Parfum, the story of a murder. I've seen the film, and the film is really quite strange, and so that kind of, I don't know, it felt Gothic adjacent. Have you guys read the book? How do you feel compared to the film? Tell me, let me know these things. And then lastly, I would also just like to add Lapvona by Tessa Moshfegh. It's her more recent novel. It's set in like a little medieval fiefdom. So again, anything medieval feels inherently Gothic. The Gothic draws hugely on medieval in terms of like, if you look at it aesthetically and architecture, even though obviously things made in the medieval period were never called Gothic. Gothic is something we've like said retrospectively about the architecture, but this just feels dark and spooky. It is something that I don't know, I think my mum started reading it and then she didn't like it as much, so then I haven't wanted to pick this up, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I wouldn't enjoy it because mum and I don't have conflicting or opposite tastes. But yeah, okay, oh my gosh, we're done. Again, I was like, I'll do a little list video of things they should read, and of course, half my coffee table is now covered in books and drinks and snacks because... But yes, there we go. Let me know what you think is the Gothic novel to be reading this time of year. If there are any of these that you have read and love, hate, do tell. And especially if there's any glaring obvious ones that you think I have missed off here or that I should read. Because, you know, this goes both ways, guys. This goes both ways. And of course I have Substack. I'm just going to plug it again until everybody in the whole world reads my Substack. And of course, thank you to those who have subscribed to my Substack. I have over 100 subscribers on there. It's very... starting like a new form of social media is really like fun and exciting, so thank you all. I really, really do appreciate it. But yes, thank you oh so much for your time. Thank you for your attention. I wish you many good and spooky and unsettling reads on these now long, long nights that we are in for. I'll see you guys soon. If I strictly call it Gothic, am I full of shit? I need to fact check myself.